Urza, the High Artificer. There's perhaps no character that's more iconic and representative of Magic the Gathering's earliest stories and sets released than this guy. Protagonist of the Artifact cycle, comprising of a total of 4 books published between 1998 and 1999, Urza was one of, if not the most, brilliant and greatest artificer that the world of Dominaria has ever known, as well as a very powerful wizard. This is a story of death and a story of vengeance. It is the story of 2 siblings who found themselves on opposite sides of the same battlefield and fought each other to the death. It is a story of obsession, envy, resentment, and pain. More importantly than anything else though, this is a story of 2 brothers who tried their best to escape their fate, but were inevitably drawn to it. It is a story that over the years has reshaped the world of Magic and everything within it. Today, on Walkers 101, we deal with the blue-centered Planeswalker Urza and his adventures in Magic's multiverse. Now, although this video is technically about Urza, the High Terisiare Artificer, founder of the Thalarian Academy on Dominaria and creator of the Silver Golem Karn, we cannot really talk about this splendid character without spending at least a few words on his younger brother, Mishra. Right off the bat, it seems to be more than just brotherhood linking the 2 brothers. Urza and Mishra were born on the first and last day of the same year respectively, to a noble and well-off family of Argive, which was one of the 3 coastal kingdoms of Terisiare on Dominaria. Such is their importance in Magic's history that the year in which they were born was marked as the year 0 of the Argivian calendar by later historians, and even today it is still used on Dominaria to talk about events predating the actual brothers' existence retrospectively. The mother of the 2 brothers died while they were still very young, and when their father fell victim of an incurable disease in 10 AR, the 2 brothers were sent to an old archaeologist friend of his father's named Phyrexia to serve as students at their archaeological dig. Under Phyrex's guidance, the 2 brothers acquired a great deal of knowledge about the manufacturing of artifacts from the archaeological excavations of the ancient ruins of the Thran Empire, who had ruled over Terisiare thousands of years prior to their existence. While Urza developed a talent for detached study, Mishra actually always preferred a hands-on approach, participating in the diggings to uncover new artifacts on a daily basis. Over the several years that the 2 brothers spent at Phyrex's camp, Urza and Mishra made both several groundbreaking discoveries and inventions. While perhaps the most obvious and renowned of these was the celebrated ornithopter, the most important turned out to be the discovery of the Caves of Koilos. These caves turned out to be filled with a lot of precious lost Thran artifacts, but more importantly, they also conceived a long-forgotten gateway to the dark and twisted world of Phyrexia. The gateway had been used by the Phyrexian demon Gix, Yawgmoth's second-in-command, during the first Phyrexian invasion of Dominaria thousands of years ago. On their first visit to the heart of the cave, the 2 brothers uncovered the Power Stone that magically sealed the portal to Phyrexia. In haste to secure the ancient relic before the other brother, they both reached for the stone simultaneously, and the disturbance resulting from this caused the stone to break into 2 oppositely charged fragments. Urza and Mishra each kept their own fragment of the stone, which became known as the Might Stone and the Weak Stone respectively. Eventually, however, a mutual and irresistible drive for the respective brothers' half led to an inevitable falling out and duel between the 2 brothers, which resulted in nothing but the accidental death of Phyrexia herself. The inadvertent death of their mentor was the final straw that marked the final break in the relationship between the 2 brothers. The research camp soon fell apart and the 2 brothers got separated. Urza moved to Yoshia, the southernmost of the coastal kingdoms of Terisiare, and put his skills with machinery to work as a clockmaker's apprentice. Shortly after this, a public contest was announced by the ruler of Yoshia. any man who would have managed to find a way to move a massively giant jade statue across the palace courtyard would have won the prince's hand in marriage. To be fair, Urza couldn't care less about wedding the young girl, but he nonetheless participated in the contest. His goal was to put his hands on an ancient Thran tome that was held in the girl's dowry. Aided by his previous experience with artifacts and machinery, the young artificer built a gigantic machine that allowed him to easily move the statue across the courtyard as it had been requested. After this success, Urza was married to Caleb bin Krug and, more importantly, gained access to the ancient relic that he so desperately wanted to study. In the meantime, and also thanks to new findings offered by the book, Urza gained a new position within the city ranks and was named Chief Artificer of Yoshia. This never distracted him from his studies though, as he obsessively continued on his attempts to making his creations ever more efficient and advanced. For reasons of space and time, I will not go into too much detail of the conflict. However, if you wish to have a more in-depth look at this mythical standoff between the two brothers, I have an entire video completely dedicated to it, so go check it out. You can find it in the top right corner of your screen or in the description below this video. As the year passed and Urza kept at inadvertently acquiring the reins of state power in Yoshia, Mishra was carrying out the exact same task with the peoples of the Falaji Desert, increasingly becoming a closer and closer advisor to the Falaji supreme ruler over several years. A series of betrayals, double crossings and sneak attacks quickly commenced to erupt between the two brothers and their respective kingdoms, soon reaching their apex in an open war between the two factions. The Brothers' War had begun. As months passed, an increasingly elaborate set of machines developed by the two artificers began to fight each other on either side, and the whole conflict soon spiraled out of control. The war went on for decades and caused immeasurable damage to the lands in which it was fought, as well as to the two factions. Until one fateful day, in Argoth, the two brothers met face to face on the battlefield, each at the head of their respective armies. In that occasion, Urza found out that Mishra had been corrupted by the twisted and dark influence of Phyrexia and had slowly begun to turn his own human body into a living machine. The rage and anger felt by Urza in that moment made him lose control of himself, and he responded to the sickening vision of his younger brother by wielding the uncontrollable power of the Golgothian Silex. The Silex was an ancient artifact of uncertain origins which, if used correctly, had the power to wipe out entire worlds in a single instant. The Silex Blast is to this day one of the most traumatic events that Dominarian history has ever witnessed. The energy coursing from it slaughtered both armies almost instantaneously. It blasted the landscape for miles, sank the entire subcontinent of Argoth, and altered the climate balance of the plane for centuries, essentially sending the world into an ice age that lasted for thousands of years. On top of that, the blast also fractured the very fabric of the multiverse, creating an envelope of 12 worlds, including Dominaria, who were completely detached and unreachable from the outside. This was known as the Shard of the 12 Worlds. Finally, the apocalyptic explosion of the Silex also caused the ignition of Urza Planeswalker's spark. His eyes were replaced by the Might Stone and Weak Stone, the two halves of the Power Stone that the brothers had found in Koilos, and his anger grew even stronger. After having bid farewell to his good friend Taunus, then Urza planeswalked away from Dominaria just prior to the formation of the Shard, resolved to avenge his brother and hunt down Phyrexia once and for all. In doing so, however, Urza accidentally locked himself out of Dominaria and the other enveloped worlds for roughly 2,000 years. In the centuries to come, Urza became obsessed with the destruction of those whom he blamed for his brother's sickening transformation. Having realized that Mishra had been tricked into embracing Phyrexian corruption, Urza was filled with even more grief and thirst for vengeance. So he decided to embark on a lifelong hunt for retribution against Phyrexia and its demonic Dark Lord, Yawgmoth. On one of his travels, Urza met a Phyrexian newt named Xancha. Being a newt constituted the first stage of any Phyrexian's new life. Newts were creatures grown in vats of glistening oil who appeared as androgynous, hairless humans. They were grown to adulthood and then underwent a process called completion. At this point, they were differentiated into various Phyrexian forms to serve any purpose for their Dark Lord. Xancha, however, was different. Although she'd been designed to live undetected amongst humans as a Phyrexian sleeper agent, she had resisted her fate and developed instead a close relationship with Urza after their meeting. Sometime after their encounter, and also thanks to some of the insights that Xancha shared with the Artificer, Urza created a mighty and monstrous dragon machine to strike the world of Phyrexia. He managed to blast a gigantic hole in the plane all the way down to the fourth of the 9 concentric spheres that constituted the Dark World, but then Yawgmoth himself intervened. The Phyrexian Lord invaded Urza's mind and made him lose control of himself, pushing him towards madness. Defeated, Urza was forced to flee to avoid mental annihilation. He ran off, wandering from plane to plane, the Phyrexians constantly on his heels, for the proud Yawgmoth could not let someone who had planned to destroy his precious Phyrexia go unpunished. After decades of roaming, Urza eventually planeswalked to Serra's realm and was healed by the human planeswalker. Right after his departure, however, the Phyrexian forces who had been following his trail invaded the realm and corrupted it. At the same time, and directly aided by Joda the Archmage, the elven planeswalker Freyalize, who was desperately trying to break free from the shard, cast the Whirl spell and shattered the shard, opening Dominaria to Yawgmoth once again. The Dark Lord then, seeing in him a valuable asset once more, released his second-in-command Gix from his eternal prison. Why was he in eternal prison, you might ask? Well, let's just say that Yawgmoth does not take failures lightly. Gix had been condemned to unending torment for having failed in his task to secure Mishra's victory in the Brothers' War. However, the demon from Phyrexia knew more about fighting Urza and infiltrating Dominaria than anyone else, and now he had a chance to redeem himself. While Gix was initially successful in his quest, Urza, informed by Xancha, soon returned to his own plane as well. The Terisiare Artificer first destroyed all sleeper agents and then killed Gix in a final battle which broke out in the ancient caves. Unfortunately, Xancha didn't survive the battle, but her sacrifice was essential to Gix's defeat, which also allowed Urza to briefly tap into the forgotten ancestry that the Phyrexians share with the Thran. Now, although Urza had managed to finally free himself from the guilt that had tore him after Mishra's death, his profound interest in the past was far from over. As the recent events had just shown, the Phyrexian threat was now more dangerous than ever before. So, the old Artificer decided to plan ahead and founded the most important and recognized school of magic and technology on the island of Tolaria, the Tolarian Academy. From all around the world, Urza summoned the most talented and brilliant artificers, sorcerers, mathematicians, and biologists to study at his prestigious school. Some you might have heard of are Barin, Teferi, and Rain. Using the information he had gathered from Gix during their encounter and the groundbreaking technology developed by his students, Urza began the creation of a time machine that allowed him to gaze into Dominarian ancient past and see the great Thran Phyrexian war that had led to the initial Phyrexian exile from the plane. Then, by transplanting Xancha's Artstone into a silver golem that he had previously constructed, Urza created Karn. Now, Karn was not simply a walking and thinking silver construct because he could theoretically enter time rifts created by his temporal disruptor and actually time travel. In the meantime, in the wake of his latest setbacks, Yawgmoth set about devising a different, new plan. Instead of infiltrating the world of Dominaria, he would prepare for a full-scale invasion of it. To this end, the Dark Lord of Phyrexia started to amass a great army and created the artificial plane of Wrath, which he planned to fill with troops and then merge onto Dominaria, therefore allowing all of his forces to invade the plane instantaneously. Even as he set his new plans into motion, Yawgmoth never ceased sending troops after Urza, whom he believed constituted the single biggest threat to his plans of conquest. One of the most successful ones was Kirk, a sleeper agent who managed to track down Urza's academy on Dominaria, where mages were being trained and artifacts were being built to fight off Phyrexia. Kirk succeeded in destroying the place, but Urza sent the Silver Golem Karn back in time to prevent it. The golem was successful, but the time machine overheated in the process and the academy was sadly destroyed nonetheless. On top of that, when Urza returned 10 years later, he found that the time streams of the island had been twisted by the incident. In some places, 10,000 years happened in mere seconds, while in others, it was the other way around. Trapped inside a fast time bubble, Kirk had ages to prepare for an attack on Urza, but the Planeswalker eventually managed to defeat him with the help of the Yawgmoth nature spirit Multani. After that, Urza was torn by guilt for having been indirectly responsible of the destruction of the academy. Eventually, however, he decided to rebuild the place, reasoning that the temporal rifts throughout Dominaria could actually be used to his advantage. The Planeswalker designed special work suits that allowed Tolarian researchers to finish up centuries of work in just a couple minutes by exploiting the time acceleration of fast time bubbles. Following the same principle, potions brewed in slow time bubbles could easily extend a promising student's lifespan for decades. For the first time since his quest to take down Phyrexia had started, Urza felt like he had found a viable way to make up for the multi-millennial head start that the Phyrexian had enjoyed up to that moment. After the battle for Dominaria was over, Urza began to work on what he called the Salvation of Dominaria. It was a flying ship capable of traveling at supersonic velocity as well as of plane shifting between worlds. Armed with the best weaponry ever conceived and piloted by the best warriors, this ship would constitute the strongest single asset amongst Urza's resources. Built with the frame of the nearly indestructible Thran metal fused with the weather seed from the heart of Yawgmoth, Urza gave birth to his new, formidable invention. The skyship were the light. Problems quickly arose, however, on how to power the ship's mana battery, as the energy required to fully charge its Power Stone core was equal to that of an entire plane. With much regret, Urza decided to sacrifice another world to save his own. He eventually chose to exploit the energy from the collapsing Phyrexian overrun Serra's realm and managed to trap the planar energy of the world just before it was erased from existence. Urza was not done though, and to complement his latest invention, he soon after started working on another project, the Bloodline Project. The Bloodline Project was a grand plan of genetic engineering set up by Urza to create the perfect warrior breed to fight off the Phyrexian invasion. The project mobilized the full resources of the Tolarian Academy for decades and resulted in the engineering of the artificially created magical race of the Thran soldiers, as well as the birth of a group of individuals whose lineages had been manipulated to ensure that they would be the very best of what humanity had to offer. These individuals had been solely conceived as soldiers, engineered warriors with no will of their own, eerily similar to the Phyrexians that they had been designed to fight. After discovering this, Yawgmoth did his best to increase the raids on Dominaria, tracking down the Bloodline Project results and killing them. Despite Yawgmoth's efforts, some Bloodline children managed to escape the attacks, such as Gerard, the true heir to Urza's legacy, a collection of artifacts made for the sole purpose of destroying Yawgmoth. At times, the attacks became so frequent that they started to play a role in local myths. Stories about the Lord of the Wastes, a machine lord who waged eternal war on Dominaria, started to spread throughout continents, from Benalia to Yamura. After many centuries of preparation, Yawgmoth finally launched his full-scale invasion of Dominaria in 4205 AR. Throughout most of the invasion, Yawgmoth remained within the depths of Phyrexia, while his minions Krovax and Sabo Tavok commanded the Phyrexian armies in battle. Tavok's plagues and shock troops devastated numerous Dominarian nations, while Krovax oversaw the overlay of the Plane of Wrath onto Dominaria, bringing millions of additional Phyrexian soldiers and monstrosities to assault the already besieged world. Yet, even as Phyrexia exhausted Dominaria's nations, the defenders managed to endure for months, delaying Phyrexia's victory. In the face of this continued resistance, Yawgmoth grew convinced that his ultimate foe was not Urza, but rather the living spirit of his former lover and scourge, Rebecca herself, whom he believed had somehow survived the destruction of the Thran and ascended to become the Dominarian Ward Soul, Gaia. As Dominaria struggled, Yawgmoth sensed Rebecca resisting him even still, ever more determined to shut him out of Dominaria for all eternity. Phyrexia as well received its own fair share of devastation when Urza assembled the collection of Planeswalkers that he called the Nine Titans, arming them with massive suits of power armor known as Titan Engines, and planning a counterattack on the Nine Hells of Phyrexia. Once inside the hellish plane, the Planeswalkers unleashed havoc, hoping to destroy its core. However, they were soon interrupted by the betrayal of Tevesh Zat, who ended up killing his fellow Planeswalker, Daria. Expecting that something like this could happen, Urza had implanted a device in each of the suits, a sort of mystical kill switch which he could tap into at any time, resulting in the death of his occupant. Upon the expected treachery of Tevesh Zat, Urza activated the switch and killed him, sealing his essence within a soul bomb, which was a powerful weapon that exploited the power of a soul trapped inside to cause massive destruction. This powerful weapon was supposed to be used to destroy Phyrexia, but before he could do that, Urza was driven by angel-like Phyrexian creatures to kill another one of his companions, Terisiare, using the same kill switch that he had triggered on Zats. After this, Urza was taken to the 7th sphere to observe what was apparently his enslaved brother Mishra, who had been tortured for thousands of years in that hellish place. Next, also influenced by the mounting psychotic effect of the glistening oil, Urza reached all the way down to the 9th sphere, alongside Gerard, to surrender and to worship Yawgmoth himself. In a sick turn of events, the pair was forced by the Dark Lord to fight each other to the death in the Phyrexian arena. Yawgmoth, who in Phyrexia could wield the power of a god, stripped Urza of his Planeswalker's powers, leaving him a weak old man. Okay, so what's going on here exactly? I mean, why did Urza and his beloved bloodline child Gerard decide to change sides and suddenly worship Yawgmoth? To fully understand this, we need to take a little step back. Gerard had chosen to ally with the Lord of the Wastes in the hope that the Dark God could return his lost, slain love Anna back to him, while Urza had somehow slowly become affectionate of his foes, admiring the power and knowledge that they had managed to achieve through artificiality. On top of that, Yawgmoth had promised unfathomable knowledge to him had he bested Gerard. The fight between the two lasted for quite some time, until at one point Gerard managed to land a deadly strike that beheaded Urza in an instant. Thus, Urza was defeated, and Gerard was crowned Yawgmoth's new champion. It was in this moment, in the last hours of the conflict, that Yawgmoth himself returned to Dominaria for the first time in 9,000 years. He did so in the form of a black, world-spanning death cloud that killed Dominaria's defenders and resurrected them to fight for Phyrexia. Immediately, the Dark Lord's plan was clear to everyone. Yawgmoth himself was to be the final stage of the invasion. In the meantime, a disillusioned Gerard had terribly regretted his actions and had resolved to change sides again, betraying Yawgmoth and escaping the stronghold, carrying alongside with him Urza's severed head. Then, as Gerard was heading back to the transformed Weatherlight, he remained shocked to hear Urza's head talk to him. As it turned out, the loss of the body was a minor inconvenience to Urza, as his life and spirit were contained within the twin gemstones, the Mightstone and Weakstone, which rested in his eye sockets, though his powers had been greatly weakened. All of a sudden, there was still hope for Dominaria. Even as Yawgmoth's black spirit wrapped around the entire world and prepared to crash it in his grasp, Urza and Gerard hovered high above the ground in the skyship Weatherlight, the main part of the legacy. Unwilling to accept defeat, they fired at one of the two satellites of Dominaria, the Null Moon, and collected all the white mana that had been gathering there for millennia, ever since the Thran artificers of ancient times had launched it into the sky and caused Yawgmoth's first defeat thousands of years ago. At this moment, recognizing that the tables were turning, Yawgmoth tried to flee back to Phyrexia, but the stone druids had activated the volcano under the stronghold on Wrath, covering the only remaining portal to Phyrexia in deep magma. Yawgmoth was hit and severely hurt by the stream of white mana, but he survived. Then, seeing the Weatherlight transfigured and wreathed in beaming white mana almost like a divine being, Yawgmoth no longer saw it as Urza's skyship, but instead clearly perceived it to be the soul of Rebek, the protector of Dominaria and his sworn enemy. Resolving to possess and destroy Rebek at last, Yawgmoth summoned a storm of monstrous giant black tentacles that erupted from the black clouds and attacked the Weatherlight. It was in that desperate moment that Urza revealed to his crew the final secret behind his legacy. To finally fire the weapon, they had to combine the various pieces that they had gathered in their journey alongside the Mightstone and the Weakstone, Karn's body, and Gerard's life. Gerard took out Urza's gemstone eyes and placed them inside the cavities in Karn's chest, completing the legacy at last. Both Urza and Gerard died in the activation. The exact working of the legacy device is unknown, but it created a sentient light that exploded from the Weatherlight and dissolved Yawgmoth's death cloud form, finally killing him. As the fatal burst of energy ended the war, Phyrexian forces lost all their will to live with the death of their god. Phyrexia had finally been defeated. In the wake of the epic battle, Karn, now infused with Urza's spark and the power unleashed by the legacy, took up his former master's staff and soon left Dominaria. The plane of Phyrexia is nothing but a smoldering shell now. It was left in shambles after the 9 Titans launched their offensive, but whether or not any Phyrexians survived and stayed back is currently unknown. As for Yawgmoth, 100 years after the invasion, there have been rumors about him having somehow survived the legacy, but none of these voices has ever been proved. Hey you guys, thank you so much for tuning in and watching this episode of Planeswalkers 101 featuring Urza, the High Artificer. Also in preparation for the next set release featuring the Brothers War, which I'm sure you'll find many of the cards and the events of which I've talked about. Okay, so as always, make sure to subscribe, comment, like, share the video with your friends. I also have socials, Discords, Twitters, Patreon, whatever you want to do. I'm gonna be grateful. So thank you all so much again for watching. My name is Octopus, and I'll see you in the next one.